Hello, and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I am your host, the Fantasy Football Actuary, Brock Talby. We made it. We made it through week one, guys, and it was a glorious week of football. I watched football all afternoon, Sunday until Sunday night, and then last night, the doubleheader. Stayed up late watching the Titans and Broncos. For us East Coast people, the game didn't kick off until 10:10 p.m., which was insane, but I made it through for you guys, and I enjoy watching football. So we will get into our first segment here, Congratulate or Commiserate. I teased this segment in the first episode. This will just be a segment where I go through my 3 leagues and let you guys know how I did. And then we'll go to some listeners who either tweeted at me or messaged me on Instagram or Facebook and share how they did. So we can either congratulate each other or we can commiserate with each other. And you at home can either congratulate yourselves on a week well done, or at least know that other people are losing as well. So here we go. Myself, I went 3-0 in my 3 leagues this weekend. And I actually was high point scorer in 2 of them. The 2 redraft leagues, I was the high point scorer across the league. And that was due to Josh Jacobs, David Johnson, and Josh Allen, which I have in both of my redraft leagues. So as of now, through week 1, I'm really glad I committed to my guys during the draft season. It's paying off. We'll see if it continues, but I'm hopeful. The dream of 16-0 in all 3 leagues is still alive. 3 championships, that would be perfect. I might have to retire from fantasy football if that happens. My dynasty team was middle of the pack. I think I was the 4th or 5th highest point scorer, but I did enough to win. Cam Newton looked good for me, and my wide receiver group of Diggs, Cooper, and Chark did just enough to get me the win. Antonio Gibson was the only real letdown in my lineup on that team. I thought he would do more, especially if Washington ended up winning, which they did. I thought it would be in a larger part due to Antonio Gibson, but Peyton Barber got those 2 touchdowns. When they got the lead, they just kind of let Peyton Barber plod around out there on the field until the clock ran out. I think he was like 15 for 25 or something absurd like that, but he had 2 touchdowns. So I think Antonio Gibson's obviously the most explosive back. I think he's the best playmaker on the team. I think he'll get more use going forward. It was just a weird game. The Eagles got dominated. The Washington's line on defense is insane, just chock full of first round talent, and the Eagles had no answer. Wentz didn't look that good. They got to Wentz a ton. Just was not a good week. If you started Boston Scott, he did not come through for you. I saw a lot of analysts on Twitter being, Boston Scott is an auto start. And I chimed back a couple times and I was like, well, I don't know if he's an auto start. And that's why he did get hurt, but it was definitely not an auto start. So I went 3-0. Let's congratulate or commiserate with a listener. Chris on Twitter shared his week 1 struggles. So this is going to be a commiserate. The starting running back duo of Joe Mixon and James Conner, oh man, along with wide receiver 1 Michael Thomas. Yikes, led to a depressing weekend. I feel for you, man. That sucks. Michael Thomas, the high ankle sprain. I'd be wary of that. James Conner getting hurt in the first half. That sucks. Joe Mixon, he had like 60 yards and a fumble. I think he only ended up with like 5 points depending on your format. That is not a recipe for success. Chris ended up being the low point scorer in his league. And that lineup would have looked solid going into the weekend too. So that shows how fickle fantasy football can be. Chris, I'm hoping you can turn it around. It's going to be tough with those injuries to Connor and Thomas. Hopefully you can use the waiver wire well and overcome these initial injuries and pick yourself back up from this 0-1 start. So that was congratulate or commiserate. Just a reminder, next week I will send a tweet out, and if you want to share your results and be featured on the podcast, just tweet back at me or message me on Instagram or Facebook, and we will congratulate or commiserate together. So the next segment I'm going to move into, this will be my normal Tuesday segment. It's going to be high flying or nose diving. So I'm going to take a look at each position. I'm going to discuss a high flying quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and then a nose diving quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So my high flying QB for the week is Aaron Rodgers. He was drafted pretty late, probably QB 10 off the board on average across your leagues, but he looked like a stud. I think he's a solid low-end QB1. I don't think this game makes him an auto start in any single QB formats. In 2 QB or Superflex, he's probably an auto start in those leagues. As I said, a low-end QB1. But I think this game more so showed how bad the Vikings defense is. Rodgers just carved him up. It didn't matter who he was going to. And I think this just shows that you can stream a quarterback with fairly high confidence against the Vikings. I have written here in the notes, trash fire defense with a question mark. It might be. I know they lost a ton on defense going into the season, and it definitely showed. Maybe they can put it together here in the next couple of weeks, but as of now, start your quarterbacks against the Vikings. My nose diving QB is Tyrod Taylor. I liked him as a QB1 this week against the Bengals. I had him ranked 10th going into the week. He finished with only 208 yards and no scores, and he didn't run at all. I have him, he finished QB 27, I think. That might have been before the Monday night games, but so really far off of where I ranked him. Without that rushing base, I don't think he's going to have much use. So if they don't start letting him run a little bit, the offense looked super conservative. He only had 208 passing yards. So I would not look to start him even in 2 QB or Superflex leagues going forward until I saw more from him, especially on the rushing side. If he starts rushing the ball and gets 30 to 40 rushing yards a game, then he might be in consideration in 2 QB and Superflex leagues. But as of now, I'm staying away. My high-flying running back is Malcolm Brown. So Malcolm Brown got 18 attempts to Cam Akers' 14, but he looked a lot better doing it, and he scored 2 TDs. He may not be the lead back for the entire season. I would project him not to be, but for at least the first few weeks here and the next few weeks going forward, I think he's going to be their running back 1. And I did say last week, if I had to pick one of these Rams running backs to start for week 1, it would be Malcolm Brown. And this is why McVay and the Rams like Malcolm Brown a lot. But I just think the talent of Cam Akers will eventually win out. And it's not like Malcolm Brown dominated the backfield. He had 18 attempts and Akers had 14. So as a split backfield, it might be Akers next week that gets a couple more attempts than Brown, and then he gets 2 touchdowns. So I think Malcolm Brown's a solid start for the next couple weeks at least, but I would not project him to be your running back 2 for the rest of the season or anything like that. My nose diving running back is Austin Eckler, unfortunately. I have written here, see the Tyrod note. The offense did too little, and Eckler was oddly not involved in the passing game of what little passing game there was. Like I said, Tyrod only threw 208 yards, but Eckler only had 2 targets. I saw some people on Twitter, including Matthew Berry, tweeting out saying how fans shouldn't be happy with Clyde Edwards-Helaire's performance on Thursday with only 2 targets, and then disappointed that Eckler only got 2 targets as well. And I think comparing Clyde to Austin Eckler isn't really a fair comparison. The carries that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to get on Kansas City are far more valuable than the carries that Eckler is going to get on the Los Angeles Chargers. So to make up that disparity in carry value, Eckler has to be involved in the passing game. That's what his draft value is predicated on. So if he's only getting 2 targets and splitting backfield carries, he might not even be the best rusher on his team. So if he's only getting 2 targets and splitting backfield carries in a middling offense that looks to be super conservative, obviously people aren't going to be happy. And I don't understand how you can disparage fans or fantasy football players for being happy with Clyde Edwards-Helaire's performance, but not happy with Austin Eckler's performance just because they both only had 2 targets. It doesn't make any sense to me. If Eckler is going to return on that second round draft value that a lot of people put into him, he's going to have to get more involved in the passing game. because like I said, I don't even know if he's the best rusher on his team. And we will talk about that a little bit later. The high flying wide receiver I have is Calvin Ridley. I wasn't quite as high on Ridley as a lot of fantasy analysts going into the season, and dang, did Ridley make me look the fool this week. He had over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. I wouldn't expect this kind of performance every week. There was 3 Falcons wide receivers, Julio Jones and Russell Gage included, that had over 100 receiving yards. Julio also had 150. He had no touchdowns. But they got down early to the Seahawks. Russell Wilson was tearing them apart. Just a perfect performance from Russell Wilson. So they basically abandoned Todd Gurley in the run game pretty early on. And Matt Ryan was just out there slinging it. So I wouldn't expect this kind of performance, but I think I was probably too low on Calvin Ridley. I think him and Julio could definitely finish as wide receiver ones this year, both in the top 12. I think it's very doable. I think Julio will end up with more yards. I don't think Ridley's going to keep up with Julio in yardage for the whole season, but I can see Calvin Ridley ending up with more touchdowns. I think he just has a knack for getting in the end zone, and I think Ryan looks his way on touchdown passes. So I really love Calvin Ridley going forward. I think he's an auto start. Treat him as a wide receiver one. So put him in your lineup with extreme confidence. My nose diving wide receiver is very unfortunate. It's Michael Thomas. He had 3 catches for 17 yards. Just looking at this stat line now, I still can't believe it. He was the wide receiver one going off the boards in all drafts. So to see him finish with 3 catches for 17 yards, going back to Chris, man, I feel for you. This sucks. And he ended the game with a high ankle sprain, and it sounds like he might try to play through it. This is just really bad for fantasy owners. For anybody who invested a first-round pick in Michael Thomas, this is the worst-case scenario. Saquon tried to play through a high ankle sprain last year, and we saw how productive he was. I think he started 1 or 2 games that he didn't even finish because of this high ankle sprain, and trying to play through it, it definitely hampers you. So if Michael Thomas is playing, you have to play him. He's your wide receiver one. He was the wide receiver one. You drafted him to be that. So you have to play him if he's active, but you might want to temper your expectations. It's just a rough situation all around. Best case scenario is that he would be ruled out for like 1 week and then come back at full strength in 2 weeks. But if he's going to try to play through, I think for the next couple of weeks, you might end up getting a hampered Michael Thomas that doesn't return on the production that you want from Michael Thomas, which makes him a interesting trade target. If you are a team that has a stacked wide receiver core, I can see trying to target Michael Thomas. Obviously, the owner of Michael Thomas is probably really bummed after the first week. He's seeing that 2-point stat line and being like, this is my first round pick, and now he's injured. What am I going to do? My season's falling apart. You might be able to go to that guy, get Michael Thomas. If you're comfortable maybe sitting him a week or 2, maybe riding out this high ankle sprain for the first half of the season even. Only if you're stacked at wide receiver and you have a lot of depth, I can see trying to trade for Michael Thomas and riding out his injury. So my high-flying tight end is Dallas Goedert. He was basically the only bright spot for the Eagles on Sunday. He was super involved, and I really liked seeing that. It's odd to have a tight end 2 from a team as a weekly starter, but I think Goedert is for sure a weekly starter going forward. If you drafted Goedert and like Chris Herndon or TJ Hawkinson or Blake Jarwin, who's now out with an ACL tear for the year, if you drafted Goedert and any of those other flyer tight ends, I'm starting Goedert over those guys. And I think he's a weekly start at tight end right now. Carson Wentz likes going to him, and I would have confidence starting him. So my nosediving tight end is George Kittle. This is another unfortunate victim of the injury wave that hit in week 1. He ended the game with a sprained knee. He probably will try to play through. I don't think it's a serious injury, but it obviously took away some snaps in week 1, and he didn't return on the tight end 1 value that you drafted him to be. Same thing that I said for Michael Thomas goes for George Kittle as a trade target. People might be panicking and they see that low score in week 1. They see an injuries designation next to his name. I can definitely see targeting George Kittle if you are willing to wait for him and to return on those tight end 1 numbers. So that is my high flying and nose diving section. Like I said, I'm just going to cover one stud and one disappointment based on my rankings from the previous week and talk about if I see this continuing or not. Aaron Rodgers, like I said, pretty solid low end QB1, not an automatic starter in 1 QB leagues, but definitely a great QB2 option in Superflex or 2 quarterback leagues. Tyrod Taylor, avoiding him even in Superflex leagues. Malcolm Brown, I think he's going to be a good starter for the next few weeks. I wouldn't guarantee anything past that. I think they want to make Akers their guy. Austin Eckler needs to get involved in the passing game. Ridley, in my eyes, is a wide receiver 1 right now. Start him over basically everyone. Michael Thomas, unfortunate, maybe a trade target. Goddard, great start at tight end. I think we will talk about him in a little bit again. And then George Kittle, another trade target maybe for a panicky owner. We'll see how his injury shakes out. So this next Tuesday segment is going to be called Straight Fire from the Waiver Wire. I'm going to go through running back, wide receiver, and tight end. I'm going to give you my top targets for each of those positions. I'm not going to go over quarterback. Usually you're not spending a ton of fab on quarterback unless you have an injury, which is unfortunate. But most of the time you're picking up running backs, wide receivers, or tight ends to start this coming week. Or just build out your depth maybe in case of injury or when the bye weeks start. But you're not really looking to pick up quarterbacks very often. So I'm just going to go through running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends and give you my thoughts on how much fab I would spend on them and who are my top targets. So we'll start with the running back. My top target right now is Benny Snell. James Conner has an extensive injury history, and we saw that when he left the first half of Monday Night Football. And even before he left, he was pretty ineffective. I think when I checked, he had 6 carries for 9 yards. So Benny Snell came in and went 19 carries for 113 yards. He almost lost a fumble that didn't look very good, but they got him back in there, and he looked good besides that. We know that Mike Tomlin likes to use the bell cow running back strategy. Jalen Samuels will come in on 3rd down play, but if Snell's the starter, he's going to get a lot of run. And he looked pretty good. 19 for 113 yards is a solid yards per carry. I would have confidence starting Snell. You'll want to monitor James Conner's injury report. They were going to do some analysis on it Tuesday, which is today. I haven't seen anything yet at the time of this recording. So you want to monitor that. If it comes out that Conner's out for multiple weeks, I'm willing to spend 20 to 25% of my fab on Benny Snell if I'm a running back needy team. If you're not as running back needy, maybe you need a solid flex option. You could go up to 20% of fab on him, but I would temper it down more towards like 10 to 15 range if you're not super running back needy, just because you don't know when Conner's going to come back. And if Conner is healthy, he is the number 1. I just think Conner's super injury prone. He's already hurt, and Snell looked good. So he would be my top target. Other running backs to consider, Joshua Kelly, he went 12 for 60 and a touchdown, and Anthony Lynn praised him after the game. They like him in Los Angeles. And this is why I said Eckler might not be the best rusher on his team. Joshua Kelly's more typical for a running back. He's bigger than Eckler. They brought him in because Melvin Gordon's gone. And for anybody that was hoping that Eckler would become a workhorse running back and get more carries now that Melvin Gordon is on the Broncos, I think this just kind of puts a damper on that. I think Joshua Kelly looked good, and he's going to keep being involved. 12 for 16 a touchdown, that's a very good flex option. So you could pick him up and put him in your flex this coming week. Adrian Peterson, Kerryon Johnson was non-existent in this Lions game, and DeAndre Swift had a miserable drop that would have been the game-winning touchdown. So I think AP is probably going to be their lead back moving forward, and he looked good. He probably should be their lead back. So I would target Adrian Peterson. He's not widely owned. Malcolm Brown is the next target. He might be more owned. I saw a lot of people picking him up before the weekend. But I think he's a solid start for the next couple weeks at least. He's the running back I would start from the Rams for the next couple weeks until we see something out of Akers that tells me otherwise, that Akers is the guy. But right now, I think Malcolm Brown's just a little bit ahead, and he did get those 2 touchdowns. So I can see him being their goal line work guy. Nyheim Hines, so I didn't talk about Marlon Mack tore his Achilles and he is done for the season. Obviously, this boosts Jonathan Taylor's value a lot, but Jonathan Taylor was already a 4th or 5th round pick in your draft. So he's rostered. Nyheim Hines is not. And Hines actually led the Colts in rushing yards and receptions and scored 2 touchdowns. So I think the passing work is guaranteed. Rivers loves dumping off to the running back. We saw that when he was on the Chargers with Melvin Gordon. And we saw it this past weekend with Nyheim Hines. I think in any kind of PPR format, Hines is a good target. I think he's a good flex option. In standard, not so much. But the passing game volume is basically guaranteed. I can see him having 10 catches in a couple games this year. So I'd be confident in Hines in any kind of PPR format. And finally, just some backups to own. Alexander Mattison and Chase Edmonds were both involved in week 1. Madison had a decent amount of yards. Edmonds had the touchdown. And if Cook or Drake go down, these guys automatically become running back 1s. So they should be rostered. If they're not, just check your waiver wires and see if they're rostered. If you have a spot, if you're not dealing with a ton of injuries already, I would throw them on your roster. And in deep leagues, they could be flex options, but mostly they're going to be just automatic running back 1s in case of injury. So moving on to wide receiver, my top wide receiver to grab is Sammy Watkins. He looks to have a hold on that wide receiver 2 spot in Kansas City right now, which can be very valuable. We saw him do well at the end of the season through the Chiefs playoff run, and it seems to have continued. I'm not projecting him to overtake Tyreek Hill or anything like that, but I think Tyreek Hill is more of a volatile player, especially in fantasy. He's going to have those games where he has 175 yards and 2 long touchdowns. And then he's going to have the games where he has 30 yards and no touchdowns. I think Sammy's probably going to be more steady. He's not going to have the ceiling. He won't end up with more fantasy points than Tyreek Hill, but I think he's pretty much locked into that wide receiver 2 role in Kansas City right now. Demarcus Robinson didn't look that good, and Mecole Hardman wasn't involved hardly at all. So I think it's Watkins' job to lose. He would be my target. Regarding fab, I don't like to spend a ton of fab on wide receivers. So if you really need a wide receiver start, you can spend 10-ish% on Sammy Watkins, but I usually don't spend a ton of fab on wide receivers. So other wide receivers to consider, Robbie Anderson. Bridgewater spread the ball around a lot. I think DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel all had basically the same amount of targets. And DJ Moore is still the number 1. He's the guy you're probably going to want to start every week. But Robbie Anderson is a good flex option any week. He has the highest ceiling of the group probably, which was shown this past week when he had the 75-yard touchdown. Any given week, he could have a long touchdown like that, which makes him a good flex, high ceiling play. So I would throw him on your roster. He definitely should be rostered. Corey Davis is another one. Tannehill looked his way a lot, which was a gut punch to me. As an A.J. Brown fan, I had A.J. Brown ranked in my top 5 going into drafts. I have him across a couple of my leagues. Watching Tannehill go to Corey Davis continually was just tearing apart my soul last night. So if he's going to be this involved, I think he's a rosterable player. I probably wouldn't start Corey Davis yet. I'm still hoping that A.J. Brown is more involved than he was last night. But it looks like Corey Davis is going to have a role in that offense. Alan Lazard, he's probably the wide receiver 2 in Green Bay, but it was hard to glean any useful information from that Green Bay Vikings game just because the Vikings were so bad on defense. And Rodgers dominated no matter who he threw to. So Lazard's probably the wide receiver 2. He's probably the guy I would own over MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but hard to tell from week 1. And then Laviska Shenault, he's another upside rookie for the Jaguars. I would pick him up in deeper leagues. I think the wide receivers, or I think the Jaguars are going to use him as a wide receiver, but also give him some carries, similar to how San Francisco gave Debo carries last year, which gives him just more of an upside. I think he could be a good flex option in deeper leagues. So my top tight end, if available, is Noah Fant. I think when I checked ESPN this morning, he was at 80% owned. It probably varies based on your platform and your format. So I think Noah Fant was a monster last night. He looked really good, and Drew Lock looked his way. He looked fast. He had the touchdown. So if he's available, he's definitely my top target. If he's not, though, I would go with Dallas Goedert. Again, he's a stud. He was owned a lot less. He's a lot less owned than Fant. So I think Goddard is probably my top option in most leagues. He's going to be a weekly start. Like I said, unless you have one of those top 3 tight ends and you drafted Dallas Goedert as your backup, I think you should start him over other flyer tight ends that you took a shot on. And then OJ Howard. He's probably the tight end owned in Tampa right now. I don't think Gronk is Gronk anymore. I think he'll catch a few touchdowns, but I think OJ Howard is the best tight end in Tampa right now. He's an athletic freak. I think Tom Brady will use him. He looked good, so I would pick him up, but only if Fant and Dallas Goedert are both gone. So just to go quickly through my straight fire from the waiver wire, top running back is Benny Snell. Others are Joshua Kelly, Adrian Peterson, Malcolm Brown, Nyheim Hines, and then the 2 backups, Alexander Madison and Chase Edmonds. For my wide receivers, my top pick is Sammy Watkins. Others to consider are Robbie Anderson, Corey Davis, Alan Lazard, and Laviska Shenault. My top tight end, if available, is Noah Fant. In most leagues, it's going to be Dallas Goedert and then OJ Howard. So that will wrap up the week 2 episode, or the week 2 Tuesday episode. If you'd like to watch the podcast in video format, I am on YouTube at The Fantasy Football Actuary. If you want to follow me on socials, my Twitter and Instagram handles are at The FF Actuary, and my Facebook is The Fantasy Football Actuary. So hopefully we have another great week of football. I know the Thursday night game's not the most exciting matchup unless you're a Browns or Bengals fan. But hopefully week 2 is just as exciting as week 1, and we can win together again. One more thing I will mention is my week 2 rankings will be available for free on the website. I do flex rankings and rankings for various formats. Those are available for free on the website. Those will be posted on Thursday, hopefully Thursday morning, so it'll give you time to set your lineup before the Thursday night football game. So thank you for listening in, and I will see you on the next episode. Until then, keep crunching those numbers.